6 weeks ago. And they said the evidence supporting this consensus is, and I quote them, unequivocal. Unequivocal.
We hear constantly in the media, we hear on a variety of different formats in the news media as well as on specials. Al Gore just produced his video, The Inconvenient Truth. He reaffirms time and time and time again in that video that there is no longer any debate. It's a settled science. Well, folks, it's not a settled science by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, a survey was done in 2003 of all climatologists in the world, over 500 of them, that basically said that only 56% of them actually thought man was causing it. When you get down to, is it a settled science? Is it enough to make policy formulation? That drops to 45%. Most scientists are very skeptical at this point that we should be forming policy based on what the science is showing, or at least the science that we're hearing about is showing. Almost 45% of the scientists do not believe man is causing global warming. And that's a long ways from consensus.
Most government and media get the wrong impression by only reading the summaries for policymakers. The alarmist and misleading overviews of the IPCC's science reports.
Now, this summary for policymakers isn't a summary for policymakers at all. It's a summary by policymakers. In other words, it is a summary which is agreed line by line by government representatives. The IPCC is a political organisation set up by the United Nations to provide evidence to support the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which has been signed by governments. It is entirely political.
Just how political is explained by Chris Horner of CNN's Headline News' Glenn Beck Show.
These scientists are generally assigned 1 page to a page and a half to write with one other author. They're never asked if they agree with anything else, never asked if they agree with the chapter, the underlying work, let alone the summary for policymakers, which is written by bureaucrats and politicians and pressure group lobbyists who are in one room down a hall where the lead authors of the chapters, which are compilations of these page to page and a half writings, and a runner runs back and forth telling the lead authors, the scientists, the pressure group lobbyists want you to change the following to be in harmony with the summary. Remember, this is a document that is produced generally, the summary of which is issued months before the actual underlying work is actually even written. That should tell you something. And this writing process whereby runners subject, very credentialed scientists, many of whom have dropped off, to the humiliation of having to change their underlying work to agree with something politicians want to say.
I was at a table with 3 Europeans. We were having lunch. And they were talking about their role as lead authors. And they were talking about how they were trying to make the report so dramatic that the United States would just have to sign up to the Kyoto Protocol.
Where the governments have placed all their belief in the IPCC have placed all their faith in the computer models.
General circulation models, or GCMs as we refer to them, are trying to simulate the climate of the Earth at the surface as well as through the upper atmosphere. The climate includes not only temperature and precipitation and cloud cover, but also the atmospheric winds, changes or the movement of these systems over time from one month to another, evaporation from the oceans and from the land, precipitation onto the surface, global ice, sea cover, all the aspects of the Earth, of the planet, that are related to the atmosphere and to the oceans.
It's very difficult to create a realistic computer model because the atmosphere and the surface of the Earth and the oceans and vegetation systems are all so very complex. And the ways that all of these components of the system interact are so complex. They interact in nonlinear ways, which we really can't predict. One thing changes, which changes something else, which changes something else. There's this cascade of processes.
People have to understand that the entire global climate change hysteria is driven by computer models. It is not driven by reality. Reality is not warming up like those models said it would.
There is not a computer in the world with the capacity to handle the data, but more important, to handle all of the calculations of interaction and complexities of the climate.
We frequently hear that the incidence and severity of extreme weather, such things as hurricanes, blizzards, droughts, and floods, are increasing, and that global warming is the cause.
The argument is that we're going to have an increase of drought, and it's another part of the scare tactics. Well, more severe weather, more droughts, and so on. When you look at the long-term record, what you see is that droughts are cyclical. They do alternate, but you also see there are far worse droughts in the past than we've had in the modern record.
History shows that storm frequency and intensity is greatest in colder periods. The extreme weather of the Little Ice Age provides a good example.
The storms were much more dramatic. The storms would wipe out villages and hundreds of thousands of people at a time in storms not seen since. The Thames River in England would freeze over every year, and there would be ice parties. Crop failures meant starvation and plagues were common. All in all, it was a very difficult time to live. But what about hurricanes today? Doesn't the disastrous 2005 hurricane season prove we are having more hurricanes due to global warming? Data from the National Hurricane Center tend to show just the opposite. During the 100 years from 1851 to 1950, the total number of hurricanes per decade averaged between 15 and 22, with 5 to 8 major hurricanes. The 1940 to 50 period jumped to 24 total and 10 major hurricanes. From 1951 through 2000, the average number of hurricanes declined to a total of 12 to 15, with 5 to 6 major hurricanes per decade. This is during the period when CO2 levels were escalating. Although the 2000 to 2010 period is not yet complete, the number of hurricanes appears to be only increasing to the pre-1950 level. While the 2005 season was particularly devastating, the 2006 season had no hurricanes striking the U.S. at all. Hurricane experts almost unanimously say that it's highly unlikely that global warming is increasing the frequency and the intensity of hurricanes.
In our view, they're well within nature's variation.
Recent research at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has demonstrated that global warming may actually increase wind shear over the tropical waters of the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific tropical zones, much like what happened in the 2006 El Niño year when no hurricane struck the United States at all. Wind shear can keep hurricanes from forming, intensifying, or even cause them to disorganize. This NOAA animation shows how wind shear works. A hurricane begins to form over the central Atlantic. It then moves into the tropical zone where warm water causes it to intensify. However, if it moves into an area having wind shear, as these NOAA models are predicting will happen with global warming, the top of the hurricane is sheared off, reducing its intensity, possibly down to a tropical storm category. But there's even a more fundamental problem with the carbon dioxide greenhouse model. As depicted in this NASA animation, hurricane formation requires very warm water and a cold troposphere. Warm moist air rises and condenses into clouds. Condensation creates more warm air, causing a faster rise